What is up, guys? Have a quad and ham focused lower body leg day today with Mel. I'm going to give you guys hopefully a little bit of different context for this. So if you're watching this, the things that hopefully you will learn is what is a complete workout as far as quads and hamstrings are concerned. And we're having a secondary goal, which I'll try and keep a little bit surface for you guys, but might get a little bit deeper, is Mel is kind of going through her competitive season right now, kind of still in season, figuring out the rest of the season. And all that means for you guys, if you're not a competitor, is basically it's stressful to prep. It's stressful to be in a deficit for a long period of time, trying to make sure her body feels good, she's recovering well. Because for a whole bunch of other reasons, one, if you're trying to grow muscle, excessive stress is not a good thing. If you're trying to lose body fat, excessive stress is also not a good thing. So the other thought process with this workout, we had a lot of dialogue throughout, is how do you get enough stimulus, in this case maybe to maintain or to grow, with as little fatigue to come along the way as well too. And so we had some discussion because Mel, like a lot of people, love the sport because they like to work hard. You know, the joke and not joke, but they like the suffering of the diet and the pain of working out and all that kind of stuff. But if that's not your main goal, like, so if you're watching this and you don't have the desire to take your physique as far as possible or to make a living off of your physique, then you can balance. I just like to beat the crap out of myself in the gym and have fun. I don't care if it's not optimal or whatever. But if your goal is to make your living off of your physique, then you want to do some of the stuff that is more optimal, even if it's not always as fun. So, you know, Mel's challenge is not to just go in the gym and beat the crap out of herself for like 2 or 3 hours, because that's her definition of fun.
It is.
But sometimes too is even that balance when she's going through. She knows it's like, all right, this is a little bit much. My body did not enjoy this afterwards, or I was just feeling like crap, or whatever it is. So the exercise selection today was from the idea of how can we essentially fully train the quads and hamstrings. And the most basic definition of that, for even though I know that the hamstrings and one of the quads technically cross over your hip, is really how do we train them through full range of motion, looking mostly at the knee. I mean, where your hip position is a little bit more important for hams. But do we train them through their full contractile range of motion? So do we train the quad nearly fully lengthened, you know, through its mid-range, and then all the way into its shortened range, and same thing for the hamstring. So exercise selection, everything is intentional. I think if that is the goal, it's a good practice to prioritize the mid and lengthened range first. So when you're the freshest, you have the most energy. I do think that is the range of motion where you have the most opportunity for growth. It doesn't mean, like a lot of people are turning that information to, that you shouldn't train a muscle's fully shortened or contracted range, but I do think it's a good practice to prioritize that. So that's why we started with a seated leg curl for hamstrings, because again, the hip is flexed and the knee will be fully straight. That's a fully lengthened hamstring. And we're contracting it through, so we're getting basically through the mid-range of the hamstring as well too. So that's why we did that first, as opposed to the lying leg curl first, prioritizing that range of motion. Same with the squat pattern. So again, I know the rec fem is not fully lengthened in a squat, but when you get to full knee flexion, every other part of your quad is, every other head of your quad, and the bigger parts of your quads are getting fully lengthened. So that's why we did that motion first as well too. And we did superset those. So if you're watching this at home, obviously you can't always do that in a commercial gym. The only reason we did that was for saving time. So you're not really taking away from one or the other, supersetting them together. And we still had long rests, so we might do 1-2 full minutes rest before we do our working sets. All right, guys, 3 quick tips today to get the absolute most out of the seated leg curl. In my opinion, I've answered this question so many times. What's my favorite hamstring exercise? This is it. Nothing provides more direct force to the hamstrings with less other stuff involved. Also in a range of motion where I think they can grow the most through their mid to lengthened range. So to get the most out of it, 1, smash that pad tight on your thigh. If it's moving around at all, you should literally, when you start the set, not be able to move your thigh at all. Shouldn't be able to wiggle on this pad, and your ankle shouldn't be able to wiggle on that. So depending on your machine, set those up so that they are completely tight. Number 2, make sure you're pausing in that lengthened position. Probably the best practice is, 1, make sure you're getting a lot of force where that exercise has the most benefit, of range you can't get anywhere else. But more importantly, to make sure you're taking momentum completely out of the exercise. 3, get a good spotter. So a lot of people talking about task failure now, and most people don't realize, write this down, task failure, if you're not just quitting, which would not technically be task failure, is determined 100% by the loading pattern or the profile of the exercise. So if a machine has a cam, that's what's determining the profile. If it's plate loaded, that determines the profile. Sometimes some other things it doesn't even have, it's just an even profile. But it's that profile that determines where you're gonna hit failure in that range of motion. So when I'm spotting someone on these sets, I'm essentially fixing the profile. It's not past failure. I'm actually helping through the point of the exercise that is either made too heavy by the cam, or how you wanna look at it, you know, too light from the cam. And then bonus, if your goal is to have astronomically huge hamstrings, so this is tip number 3.5, get a seatbelt. So most normal people don't ever really have to worry about it, but if you're a competitor, or like I said, you just want the biggest hamstrings you can possibly have, I pretty much say it's not possible without ever using a seatbelt. And I'm talking people that are using stack plus weight, whatever. Where do you get a seatbelt? Use this thing called the internet. Type in seatbelt. It's not always easy. If you have someone that has a small gym they own themselves, like I've done here, we've had to bolt it on. I realize that's not practical, but some places you can go, you can strap it around and strap yourself in. Someone's saying that's a huge pain in the butt. Again, if you're a normal gym goer, yes, that's a huge pain in the butt. But if your goal is to have the biggest hamstrings of all time, then you need to tolerate having a little bit of a pain in the butt. Make it work for your hamstrings, not for your convenience. So there's 3.5 tips to get the most out of your seated leg curl.
I have a question on number 3.
Yes.
I was actually thinking it toward the end of our set. So we just finished our last set, my top set, with 6 reps.
Yep.
And the last 2, you were helping me keep it as it's supposed to be. On my own, you know, I would have had 4 really solid reps there.
Yeah.
So is it essentially getting the same thing out of it, or almost the same thing, if I'm training alone and I do a little bit less weight and I get those 8 good reps, and then the last 2 maybe aren't as pretty? How would you adjust that?
What I'd probably do would be keep the weight the same. So if we did, again, this weight that you'd say you get 4 good reps on your own, do 4 reps on your own, and then finish with a couple partials. I'd probably say that's the closest. It's not going to be the exact same type thing, but the whole reason that I wouldn't want it is I think you want as much load as possible in those ranges of motion where you're strong, and that's what you're getting with that weight. You're making sure that you're taxing with a load. So basically your hamstrings through that mid and lengthen range can do 6 reps. They just can't do that same weight through that shortened range. So again, if you really look at that mid and lengthen range, if you did 4 full reps and then whatever, maybe 2 partials where you still got it, that's probably gonna be the closest type of stimulus. And then just for tracking, there's no right or wrong way, but I always tell people, like, if I was gonna write something down, I would write, like how I would do that when I'm training myself is I write 4 to 6. And then I know that that means I did 4 on my own, and then I did 6 partials. Because you do want to avoid the thing where it's like, all of a sudden you're writing down you did 10 reps, but then like 10 reps just turns into like 8 million little partials or whatever, so.
Right,
Yeah.
right. Yeah, I think typically I would hit, you know, the 4 solid reps and then make it a drop set or something.
Yeah.
But partials, so you're still getting that.
I think partials would probably be the better way to go about it, where it's, again, probably getting the most benefit, because that's the whole thing. It depends on the individual how much you're really worried about that fatigue to stimulus ratio thing. And I think that's the way to get the most stimulus without too much more fatigue, where you would get more stimulus doing a drop set, but I also think you might accumulate more fatigue along the way. And so it's like most of that splitting hair stuff doesn't make a big difference for the average person. So it's like, but for you, it's good stuff to think about. And then at the end of the day, you just have to try it, you know, and obviously see what do you still progress the best on, because that's really your best gauge, when you don't feel like you're derailed from being over too much stimulus, too much fatigue, whatever, but you're able to still progress from week to week. I'm just gonna keep the reps smooth. Smooth. Yep. Let's go one more. Nice. All right, guys, 3 tips to get the most out of your quad dominant squat. I'm going to show this on a pendulum. I can already hear people groaning and rolling their eyes. I don't have a pendulum. Shut up, find one. Just kidding. So these tips are great for any quad dominant squat. If you have a pendulum, kudos for you, because the first 2 tips will be a little bit easier. So tip number 1, which will be supported by tip number 2 and number 3, is get your hamstring on your calf and pause there. Get your hamstring on your calf, smashing into it, and pause there. For all the information out there about how to grow big quads, when I walk around a normal gym and see people that have crappy quads, they're almost never doing a squat pattern where they're actually getting to full knee flexion, smashing it in there, and pausing there. Tip number 2 is take your ankle out of the equation. So again, if you're trying to get your hamstring on your calf, you don't have a pendulum, maybe you don't even have a hack, then use a heel elevation. So you can, whether you're doing a free weight squat, which would be another great variation, which is a front squat, safety bar squat, even a back squat, is get a heel elevation, a wedge, a plate, whatever it is. That will make it so much easier for you to get to full knee flexion. And then tip number 3 is get your stance out of the way. There's a lot of horrible information that still goes around that people think a narrow stance is somehow more beneficial for sweep or for quads in general. That couldn't be further from the truth. A lot of people try and force themselves into this narrow stance and actually just make it harder to get to full knee flexion and actually limit their range of motion. Most people will benefit from a wider stance, toes turned out, slightly driving the knees out as they go to the bottom. And then again, I'm going to reiterate on tip number 1. Once you do all that stuff to get there comfortably and easy, pause there, maintain that form, and then progress load over time, and your quads will thank you. So that is both of those muscle groups trained fully lengthened, and then we train them fully shortened. And there's basically an overlap in the middle. So again, like I said, this is fully lengthened, that's fully lengthened right through the mid-range. So both of these are probably, like, if I had to make up a number, 60 to 70% of the muscles fully contractile range. And then we essentially get the rest with a leg extension and a lying leg curl. And so a leg extension, we're actually fully shortening the rec fem for the most part, and the rest of the quads. And then with the lying leg curl, we're pretty much shortening all the heads of the hamstrings, because for a fully shortened hamstring, you need some degree of near full hip extension and full knee flexion. So just between that exercise selection, that's the full contractile of the range. So any other exercise that you can think of, you're not really gaining anything, again, from a quad and hamstring standpoint. You can make arguments for stuff for glutes or adductors, abductors, whatever, but from a quad and hamstring standpoint, that is a full workout. You don't technically need more than that. And so that's why when we're going through, Mel's like, why the hell are we only doing 4 exercises? She said it nicely. Yeah, but that's really, I was like, well, the goal is, let's get the job done. Let's make sure we fully train the muscles and get what is considered enough stimulus, also while mitigating fatigue. And we also did select exercises where, aside from the squat pattern, you consider all these more isolation motions, because there is, again, going to be less fatigue with those as opposed to more free weight exercises. Now, again, if you're a normal person at home, she's in her off season, recovery is great. We basically did 3 working sets at everything. So we did 6 working sets for quads, 6 working sets for hams. So that's still a decent amount of working volume. But if hypothetically you feel like you respond better with a little bit more volume, it's as simple as pick another exercise. What would I pick? Something that probably doubles down on that length in the mid-range. So it could be a split squat variation, could be a leg press, or whatever it is. 3 tips for bigger quads and healthier knees on the leg extension. Tip number 1 is make sure you have your knees pointing the right direction the entire range of motion, which should be patellas or kneecaps pointing straight forward or up as you go through extension. Any little bit that they're pointing in or out, I would argue, is not great for knee health. So that always lends itself to the question is, should I bother turning my thighs out or in to try and bias a different head of the quads? No, that will pretty much wreck your knees for maybe the most negligible difference in development. Tip number 2 is make sure you're pulling yourself down in the seat the entire time. As you come to the top, there's essentially this seesaw type motion that wants to happen where your butt wants to come up. If your butt comes up, it's changing range of motion at your knee. So this gets more important the bigger and the stronger that you are. So again, if you're really strong and using a lot of weight, you're gonna have to pull yourself very hard. And it could also lead to the point where maybe you want to invest in a seatbelt if having ginormous quads is important to you. And then tip number 3 is own the range of motion that you're really training with this machine, which is the shortened through mid-range. So when you're at the top, make sure you're actually pausing, getting a full contraction in that position, because again, that's one of the advantages of this machine. It's one of the only exercises that really loads the quads fully shortened. So there you have it, 3 tips for bigger quads and healthier knees. Enjoy. Beautiful. One more. Last one. Squeeze. Yep. 3 tips for bigger hamstrings and better practice on the lying leg curl. Tip number 1, and this is something I see going around a lot now, and this requires a little bit of thought process and nuance. Focus more on your thighs on the pad and less on the hips. And so the goal really of that is some people get so worried about their hips moving at all that they end up doing this hard posterior pelvic tilt, and it ends up being how hard can I squeeze my abs and squeeze my glutes, not having that move an inch, and then there's really no challenge because you have to use such a light load on your hamstrings. Whereas if you press your thigh really hard into the pad, that keeps your butt from coming way up, which of course you don't want to have, but also you don't freak out with a little bit of pelvis motion, so you're still able to use a lot of load and in turn tax your hamstrings. Tip number 2, make sure you're pausing at the top. So again, the whole point of this exercise really is to load the hamstrings through their mid and fully shortened position. So once you get to that top position, make sure you're not bouncing and just using momentum, and make sure you're finishing focusing on a hard contraction. Tip number 3, especially because sometimes this is the only exercise people have access to in commercial gyms that's just isolated knee flexion extension. I think it's a good practice lots of times to finish sets with partials in that mid-range of motion. So if you're pausing at the top like I recommend, very often you're going to fatigue there first, and you can have a lot left here. So a lot of people talk about task failure, which is important, but that task failure is determined by the profile of the machine, where the plates are, if it's a free weight machine loaded, or what the shape of the cam is. And so again, often it's going to be the hardest at the top, and you're essentially undertraining the range of motion. So do your working set, hit 5 or 6 full reps, and then finish with a few more partials where you still have strength, arguably in the range of motion where you can grow the most. So 3 tips: better lying leg curl and bigger hamstrings. So if I was going to do anything else, I might put another pattern in, to maybe a leg press variation or a split squat variation where we're getting full knee flexion again. But we technically already trained there, and we did 3 working-ish sets there. So then it's just a matter of what amount of volume is enough for you to grow and or maintain while also having less stimulus.
This is exactly what I need to learn right now, because I'm really my workouts, they haven't been shit, but just I'm lacking direction because I'm trying to mitigate fatigue, but I'm also trying to make sure I'm getting it all. So this is a really good way for me to gauge how much work I actually need.
And are you doing more than 1 leg day? Are you doing
2?
Okay, and are you doing one that's more like quad dominant, one more glute focus or something? Or
Well, 1 quad ham, 1 quad glute.
Yeah, okay. So that reason in and of itself too is a great reason to have maybe your quad ham day more like this. Really, I would probably only keep, in general, especially right now, I mean, if you get to a point where everything's just clicking along off season, you're in a surplus and your body's working great, then you could probably have 2 compound movements maybe in both. But now the good way to split it up is I would put a secondary compound movement on your glute day that's kind of a little bit of both. That literally like a leg press or something, right? Or even a split squat variation, kind of preference. Doesn't really make a big difference, because that's the only thing we're not really getting in this workout maybe is full hip flexion, but that's a good thing to get on a glute day. You don't really need that on a quad day. We're just really concerned about the knee joint.
Yeah, I mean, I've been doing like a squat variation and either like single leg hip press or doing leg press, and it feels like a lot, but of that mindset of I gotta get everything at all angles.
Yeah, and that's tough. So again, from a pure quad and ham standpoint, we're training through the full contractile range of motion. The muscles are essentially, you're not missing anything, if there is such a thing really. And then the reality is, I wouldn't say it would be bad for anyone to, like someone watching this saying, Joe said 1 press is enough. It's like, well, it's individual dependent. When your recovery is great. So again, if we're basically doing 3 working sets for your quads in that mid to lengthen range, and that's about it. Someone might feel like they do better with 5 to 6 working sets per workout, in which case that'd be a great reason to do another exercise. And so again, how much volume someone can tolerate and what they work best on is a whole lot of factors, but it is individual dependent,
Yeah, and phase dependent.
Yeah, exactly.
And then other question, I feel like, now I don't know if this is just like my genetic structure, but I feel like my adductors could, be a lot bigger. That's something that I think needs a lot of work. And I don't know if this is the time to be trying to so intentional about growing that, but where would you place that?
So that'd be something like right now, I mean, if it were me, I would probably just try and maintain them. And just when you're getting deep hip flexion, you're getting that. So even on your glute days, if you're doing anything full hip flexion, a leg press, split squat variation, you're gonna get adductor stimulation. If you actually want them to grow, they probably do need some isolation as well too. And if it really becomes a priority, then you could really put that on either day, because it's not gonna take, I would probably be more prone to put it on a quad day actually, because it'll take away a little bit less from your quad dominant squat, where it could actually take away a little bit from your glute dominant like press motion or whatever.
I typically start with the adduction machine on my quad ham day.
Yeah, that'd probably be a good practice
Going into
overall.
my first comp.
Then I have to look too, and honestly, it's less in figure. They don't want adductors as big. Like if you really look, it's kind of, if you go physique, then I'd have to actually look at where the standards are for that now.
Yeah, because they want.
Yeah, they don't want as much of the thigh gap. Yeah, where obviously it's figure how you stand. Like they just want sweep, 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 and more of kind of straight up and down look. But yeah, I'd have to look more at physique. So again, that's kind of the reasoning for the workout. And then the other things we had discussion about as well too is if you're trying to mitigate fatigue, what are some things that you want to do or things you don't want to do? One, I always say keep warm-up sets intentional, but lower volume. So again, I'd rather have someone do maybe a couple extra warm-up sets, but keeping the rep ranges generally around like 4 to 6. So a lot of people will go in on their warm-ups, they feel like they need to do 20 reps of leg extension for like 3 or 4 warm-up sets. And then by the end of your warm-up sets, you've already done 60 to 80 reps. Even if the load's not that heavy, that's a lot of volume. So if I can have you go through all your warm-up sets in 15 reps, that will save some degree of fatigue. And I also like the idea that it makes you more intentional. Mel was saying as we're going through, no one's thinking about 20 reps as well as you're thinking about 4 or 5 reps. So having each one where you're actually a little bit more mindful, thinking about form, I would argue, one, you're gonna get all the benefits of warming up with less fatigue, but you're also gonna be in a better mental state to get more out of your actual working sets as well too. So keep the volume on the warm-up sets low. We kind of took out any intensifier, so no drop sets, no supersets. Like I said, the supersets were antagonist body parts, so there's no real overlap. Double down on that as far as supersetting the same muscle group or doing drop sets on the same muscle group. And even there, someone will say, well, would you keep out force reps or stay a little short of failure? I'd rather still train very close to failure and use heavier loads and have overall less volume and less intensifiers, because again, it is that proximity to failure and it is those heavy loads that I think will translate to the most intramuscular force, which we still want to make sure we have a lot of, again, to either grow or maintain muscle. So you'll see that I am doing what some people are like, well, why are you spotting or giving her force reps? I touch on a little bit more detail in the video, but again, task failure is determined by the loading pattern of the machine. And so again, you could have task failure on something that has a horrible profile and get way less stimulus than task failure on something that has a good profile. So when I'm touching, you ever watch, and I'm not ever just doing like reps that she can't do. Like it's not like she can't move anywhere and then I'm making her do 4 more. That would essentially be the same as a drop set. But if she's going through a range of motion and I'm spotting the last 10 degrees, I'm just essentially fixing the profile. So where that loading pattern is too heavy for her to complete the range of motion, I give a little additional help. And so that's more of kind of an advanced technique. We talk about if you don't have me, which you probably don't, suck it. Then it's probably one of your best practices, cutting them short there, doing partial range of motions, things like that. But that was pretty much it. And then again, you'll hear a lot of dialogue as we go through about, how do you navigate this notion of efficiency? How do you balance that at home if you're not a competitor or whatever it is? But there's still some value in that to everybody. Because I think everybody, when they're lifting, goes up and down. Nobody goes to the gym for 0 results, right? So you wouldn't want, even if it's not making your career, if you're picking up weights, you probably want to look better. So again, you can always balance what are some of the things that make more sense on paper. And then also, of course, you can just have fun. And even for competitors, I joke where it's like, if you don't have times throughout the year where you're just having fun in your training, and especially training partners, just like especially stuff like leg day, it's not gonna be arm day, but if you have, every once in a while, I almost was even thinking about like programming, like I would say like 2 or 3 times a year, it's like you're let off the leash and like you just go beat the shit out of each other, because that stuff is fun. At the same time, if you don't enjoy your training over the course of your career, I would argue that your career is not gonna be as successful as it could be. So even at the highest level, you gotta have fun, you gotta enjoy what you're doing, but it might be a little bit more kind of balanced and strategic about even that fun that you're having. And it just probably can't be every single workout all the time. But that's the thing too, where some of this stuff, there's people that are gonna say, oh, don't do as many sets, don't train as to failure, pass failure, but you're already probably training easier than maybe you should at home, and we'll take that out of context. So the reason that it's good sometimes, I think also to beat the crap out of your training partners is you actually see what you're capable of tolerating, and then you also know when you've gone past it. So how do you know if you've ever actually done too much? You have to go there at some point in time and be like, oh, that was too much, and then reel back from there.
Until you cry.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. So that was pretty much it. Anything you want to add to that?
No, I think we, during our dialogue through the workout,
Yeah.
I kind of covered everything that I could have had to say.
Sweet.
But yeah, no, that was great. It felt like just the right amount of work.
Yeah.
So it was just something I've been looking to achieve.
Sweet. So hope you guys enjoyed that. And per the usual, don't forget to do the YouTube thing, like, subscribe, share with your mom who has very atrophied legs to help your mom out. And if you have any interest in workouts like this, more stuff that's in my brain, check out the link below in my bio for my app, because my programs, my brain is all within that app. I'll be like that, what is that in the Marvel movies where the guy, they preserve his brain after he's dead, and all like those in Captain America?
I was thinking
How many
of
guys
that
know what I'm
Miley
talking?
Cyrus doll that's in the little robot.
No, I definitely wasn't thinking about Miley Cyrus.
No.
I was thinking
It's like
about,
a Black Mirror.
what is it? We're gonna keep this in here. We're not gonna stop. Captain America, Dr. Zoller or something or whatever. Remember, he's the bad guy for Hydra, and then he's dead, and then they keep him on, like, my brain is in this room, and they shoot a bomb and they blow him up. That's gonna be me eventually. My app will be preserved, and that's probably very realistic if you're watching this 10 years from now with AI. My brain will be within my app, and you can go there and pick my brain. But it's close now, so go do it anyway without creepy AI robots taking over the world just yet. Till next time.